Miss Bristol Rents a Room. Written by Tom Hoffman. Narrated by Gillian Wiggin. Music written by Harry L. Hoffman in 1907. Chapter 1. When everything is lost, and all seems darkness, then comes the new life, and all that is needed. Joseph Campbell. Miss Bristol. Miss Bristol entered this world on September 20th, 2025, arriving unexpectedly just before noon near the corner of Bogart and Moore Streets in Brooklyn, New York. More unexpected than her arrival, however, was the unusual nature of her wardrobe. Elegant attire that would have been haute couture for a young woman of means strolling down Fifth Avenue in 1910, during the waning years of what Mark Twain so famously called the Gilded Age. Although Miss Bristol's clothing was undeniably elegant, the particular circumstances of her arrival were not. Young Miss Bristol staggered out of a darkened alleyway like the proverbial drunken sailor, clearly impaired by some unknown agent, her delicately embroidered travel bag tumbling to the sidewalk with a soft thud as she pressed both hands to her head, leaning over, fearing she might faint, or vomit, or both. A searing headache was blurring her vision, Miss Bristol feeling as if her skull was being crushed by some devilishly conceived medieval iron vise. She fell to her knees, collapsing with a low moan onto her soft woolen carpetbag, pressing her face against it, her body in shock, her mind numb. She lay there for almost 20 minutes, her headache eventually diminishing, her pounding heart gradually slowing to a more measured rate. A few passer-bys gave her an odd look, a perfunctory glance at her flaming bright orange hair, but nothing more substantial. She tried to focus, taking in her surroundings, the tall brick buildings, the strange metal and glass vehicles rolling past on the wide, smooth city street. It was all quite unfamiliar, but she had no idea if what she was seeing was new or old, having no memories to compare it to. She looked down at her clothes. A pale blue-fitted jacket cinched neatly at the waist, navy velvet lapels, a crisp white blouse with a high-laced collar, and a long-gored skirt almost concealing her highly polished buttoned boots. She had a folded newspaper gripped tightly in her right hand. She sat up, looked around, then unfolded the newspaper, studying the front page, her vision still slightly blurred. New York Tribune, September 12th, 1910. Airships dazzle Long Island spectators. Wright Flyers perform stunts in weekend exhibition. She had no idea what the headline meant, but now she knew the year was 1910. She gingerly got to her feet, trying to steady herself, a sudden flood of heat rushing up through her body. She leaned over, afraid she might faint again, then sat down. This was unbearable, nightmarish. Who was she? Where was she? Was this her home? Did she have a home? The world surrounding her was so strangely unfamiliar, so foreign to her. She must be dreaming. What else could it be? She closed her eyes, willing herself to awaken. When she opened them again, nothing had changed. She tried again, gritting her teeth this time, again failing to awaken. A dark thought came to her. It was a fit of apoplexy, a sudden seizure which had caused her loss of memory. She was ill, a brain disorder of some kind. Or worse, maybe she was dead. If she was dead, why was she not in heaven? Where were the angels? She reached up, pulling a long jeweled pin from her orange hair, jabbing it sharply into her finger. There was pain, and there was a drop of blood. This definitively resolved two of her most pressing concerns. She was not dead, and she was not dreaming. How did she know she had a jeweled pin in her hair? She ran her hand across the embroidered travel bag, feeling its texture, trying to remember where it came from, if it even belonged to her. She pulled it onto her lap, unhooking the rounded brass clasp, opening it, examining the contents. A chemise, stockings, a garter belt, a pale blue silk skirt, a petticoat. There was a purple velvet bag holding a hairbrush, 3 combs, face powder, Daggett and Ramsdell vanishing cream, several hair tonics, Melba rouge, and a small red leather purse holding 10 gold coins. At least she had money. That was important. One of the bottles of hair tonic proudly stated that the company had been established in 1889. That made sense, since the year was 1910. She searched the bag for any identifying documents, something with her name on it, an envelope, a calling card, but found nothing. Her faintness had passed, her headache much diminished. She got to her feet, her travel bag in one hand, stepping over to a nearby green metal bench and taking a seat, resting the carpet bag on her lap. She watched 2 scruffy-looking teenage boys walk past, wearing blue denim trousers with holes in the knees, undershirts with words and symbols printed on them, and oddly shaped, colorful shoes. One of the boys glanced back at her, calling out, "Nice hair, freak." They both laughed as they walked away. Why had they said that? Why would they call her a freak? Why were they laughing at her? It seemed to be an unusually cruel thing to say to a person they didn't even know. She leaned forward, covering her face with both hands, trying to think. A dreadful thought occurred to her. She had no idea what her face looked like. Maybe she had a hideously freakish, misshapen face. Maybe that's what they were laughing about. This was a most disturbing thought. She needed to look in a mirror. She opened her travel bag, rummaging through the bag of toiletries, finding a small mirror, holding it in front of her, desperately afraid of what she might see. She gazed at her reflection. It was not freakish. She was almost attractive looking. Some might call her pretty, with lovely bright orange hair and sparkling orange eyes. This was an immense relief to her. She closed the mirror, returning it to the velvet bag. Her thoughts were clearer now, not as jumbled. If it were a fit of apoplexy which had caused her to lose her memory, perhaps there was someone nearby who knew her, someone who would recognize her, a neighbor perhaps, someone who would be kind enough to help her. She glanced down the street, studying the shops, noting the refuse on the sidewalks, old newspapers, wrappers, a smashed bottle, an old shirt. This was uncalled for. Someone should clean it up. Under normal circumstances, she would most certainly write a letter to the newspaper's editor regarding the unsightly refuse, but these were far from normal circumstances. When she thought about it, she had no idea what normal circumstances would be. She gripped her travel bag and stood up, spotting a shop down the street with a dozen people seated outside at small tables. A cafe, perhaps. Maybe there was someone she knew there, someone who would recognize her. As she walked toward the cafe, she spotted an elderly woman sitting on a green bench facing the street, more than likely waiting for a trolley. She approached the woman, attempting a pleasant, disarming smile, a polite but friendly demeanor. "Excuse me, madam. I know this is a most curious question, but I can't seem to remember who I am. I wonder if perhaps you have seen me here before? Do you happen to recognize me?" The woman looked up at her, shaking her head, averting her eyes, looking away. Miss Bristol sighed, realizing that such a course of action would inevitably prove unsuccessful. Clearly, there were far too many people in this city for her to chance upon someone she knew. She stopped short, a thought occurring to her. Was she actually in New York City, the same city as the newspaper she had been holding? Or was she in another city? Perhaps that was why it felt so foreign to her. She looked across the street, noticing a covered stand displaying racks of newspapers and magazines. She would most certainly find some answers there. She crossed the street, approaching the newspaper stand, eyeing the rather disheveled-looking vendor leaning back in a wooden chair, an unlit cigar in his mouth, his clothes wrinkled, his hair in need of a good brushing. She studied the newspapers, noting they were from a variety of cities, not just New York. "Pardon me, sir. Can you tell me if you sell a local newspaper?" He pointed to a stack of papers in front of her. "The New York Times. That local enough?" He gave a raucous laugh. She studied the paper closely, making no response to his laugh. It was indeed the New York Times, proving conclusively that she was in New York. This was good news. Her insides twisted, however, when she read the date on the paper, September 20th, 2025. This was most concerning, and more than upsetting. She had been so certain the year was 1910. She pointed to the stack of newspapers. "Would this be today's newspaper, sir?" "It ain't yesterday's, and it ain't tomorrow's." He gave the same raucous laugh, Miss Bristol finding it somewhat annoying. "Thank you, sir." He studied her face, then her clothes, taking the cigar from his mouth. "You some kind of actress? On Broadway?" Miss Bristol nodded politely, no idea why he would ask such a thing, but impulsively answered, "Yes, an actress. On Broadway." Why had she said that? She had no memories of being an actress, clearly something she would have remembered. "The new Gilded Age show? The wife and I are going next week. Cost a freaking fortune, but we go see a play on her birthday every year. A good place to take a nap. No offense." He laughed again. "Yes, the Gilded Age show." "Thought so. Your outfit kind of gave it away." He laughed, but this time it seemed to be a genuine laugh. Miss Bristol smiled in return. "Quite so." "You doing okay? You're looking a little rough, young lady. Do a little celebrating last night?" She smiled again. "I'm quite fine, thank you." She left without buying a paper, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. It would appear she was living in the year 2025. If this was so, why was she holding a newspaper from 1910? One solution to this dilemma might be that she was indeed an actress, that she actually was in the show about the Gilded Age, and perhaps the newspaper was a prop from the play. She closed her eyes for a moment. It was truly unbearable not knowing who she was. Where should she go? Where would she sleep? Did she have a home here? Perhaps she should seek out a doctor to determine if it was a sudden seizure which had caused her memory loss. She realized she was famished, no idea when her last meal had been, or where it had been. She looked down the street at the cafe with the outside tables, a dozen people seated at them, chatting, laughing, eating and drinking, all of them knowing who they were, where they were, and why they were there. She continued down the street, approaching the cafe, reading the colorful sign that ran across the front of the building. Mama Rose's Pizza, the best in Brooklyn, maybe the world. Miss Bristol frowned, having no idea what pizza was, or who Mama Rosa was. The people dining there seemed to be enjoying their meal, however, so it must be a reputable cafe. She strolled past the tables, several diners glancing up at her curiously as she passed them, then stepped through the front door, taking her place in line. There were 4 people in front of her, Miss Bristol reading the colorful menu displayed on the wall behind the counter, trying to make sense of it. It would seem there were a great many varieties of pizza to choose from, but she had no idea which one to purchase, whether it should be a round or a triangular-shaped one. Was there a difference between them? She would ask the clerk for his recommendation, removing from her the burden of choice. When it was her turn, she stepped up to the counter, 6 people now in line behind her. "Good afternoon, sir. Would you be so kind as to offer me your recommendation regarding the various varieties of pizza? I am quite unfamiliar with—"
"What do you want? What kind of pizza?"
"What kind would you recommend, sir?"
The man turned and shouted, "1 slice of pepperoni."
20 seconds later, he set down a paper plate holding a large triangular slice of pizza.
$4.
Miss Bristol nodded with a quizzical smile, saying, "Bucks?"
$4.
She reached into her travel bag, pulling out the small red purse, removing one of the gold coins, placing it on the counter. The clerk glared at her, clearly annoyed.
"Cash or plastic? We got a line here. Let's move it along."
"I'm afraid I am unfamiliar with plastic, sir. Will this coin not suffice?" He mumbled something darkly under his breath, then slid the pizza toward her.
"This is your lucky day, girl. I'm feeling generous. Take the slice and go. We don't got time for your shenanigans."
Miss Bristol retrieved her coin, turning to leave. As she was opening the door, she heard the clerk say to no one in particular,
"That girl needs help."
Her interaction with the clerk had proven most upsetting to Miss Bristol. If this was her home, if this was where she lived, why did she not know what plastic was? Why was she unfamiliar with pizza, clearly a popular food of the day? She noticed several diners staring at her curiously, which she found to be most disconcerting. She decided to exude an aura of confidence, acting as if she was quite familiar with her surroundings. She spotted an empty table, pulling out a chair and sitting down, casually setting the plate of pizza in front of her. She scanned the table for silverware, but found none. This was quite baffling. Why would a reputable cafe not provide silverware? As unobtrusively as she was able, she stole quick glances at the other diners, watching how they ate their pizza. They were not using silverware, but instead they were folding the slice of pizza in half lengthwise and eating it with their bare hands. She grimaced, a look of distaste crossing her face. She looked down at her pizza, deciding whether or not to fold it and eat it with her hands. Perhaps she should leave. Her indecision was interrupted by a friendly voice. "Excuse me, miss. Would you mind terribly if I sat at your table? The other tables are quite full." She looked up, eyeing the white-haired old man wearing a crisp gray suit and tie, a folded handkerchief peeking neatly out of his breast pocket. "Of course, sir. I will confess I could use some friendly company."
"Wonderful. I thank you. I must say, it has been many years since I dined with a lovely young lady such as yourself."
He pulled out a chair and took a seat, smiling at Miss Bristol.
"I could not help but notice you were uncertain about what kind of pizza to get."
"Yes, quite uncertain. I must confess, this is the first time I have had pizza." The man raised his eyebrows imperceptibly. Miss Bristol corrected herself. "That is to say, sir, I have never had pizza at this particular cafe before. There are so many varieties here to choose from that I was momentarily baffled." He gave an understanding nod.
"Of course, it can be quite daunting, deciding which kind to order with so many toppings and almost an infinite variety of combinations to choose from. I find myself at times uncertain which toppings I should like to select."
Miss Bristol decided she liked this old man. He was kind, considerate of others. She watched as he folded his pizza in half, taking a bite.
Delicious as always. I have my lunch here every day at noon. Like clockwork. Excellent pizza.
Miss Bristol smiled, following his lead, folding her pizza in half. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. She blinked. She had no idea who the Romans were, or what they did.